Amen. Well, so tonight, I think it's already over, but the Olympics are over tonight. I guess the closing ceremonies are for us tonight if you're going to watch them. And I don't know. I think I'm going to be able to get my life back now. For the last 2 weeks, my bedtime was pushed later and later, and so I was useless during the day. I'm more useless than I usually am. Pretty useless, pretty much anyway. But I don't know about you. I watched the Olympics when I could, and one of the things I enjoy about the Olympics is some of the stories, some of the things that come out of the Olympics that are memorable. And you've got those stories. I've got the stories, and like Suni Lee winning the gold medal. She did not go to Tokyo thinking she was going to be the all-around gold medal champion. Everyone thought Simone Biles was, and of course we know the story of Simone Biles and the twisties, I think is what they call them. And if I'm doing all the twists and jumps and turns that she's doing in the air, if I get the twisties, I'm not doing those anymore. So I kind of understand where she's coming from. Maybe I don't understand it as experience-wise, but. And even with Simone, I think it's a good conversation to start talking about mental health and putting the person, the individual over the competition. Used to, they were like, I don't care if you're hurting or not. You get in there. And so maybe that's a good conversation as well. And swimming, the whole first week was of swimming. And so you had stories. I didn't know Caleb Dressel before this Olympic Games, but he's a beast in the swimming pool. I don't know if you know that or not. Or Katie Ledecky and 800. I don't know anybody who'd want to swim 800 meters. But she did and does it well. Or the 1,500 100 meters. Just talking about swimming. Did you know, I didn't know this, did you know they have the 10K marathon swim? Who in the world's going to swim 6.2 miles? You got to check their sanity right there. I mean, anyone who's going to be swimming 6.2 miles has to go in and get their sanity checked. Something's wrong. But then I found this out, and this is what's crazy. Did you know in the 10K marathon swimming event, there is a feeding station in the middle of the swim? There is. If you're swimming, how are you going to eat? And they're not really eating, but they are taking in nutrients. But I thought that was kind of weird that you're going to have a feeding station in the middle of the swim. But I like the story of Nevin Harrison. I don't know if you remember this story. Nevin's 19 years old, and she's gold medal medalist in canoeing, 200-meter. Canoeing. But what's interesting about her story, though, is she didn't want to be in the Olympics as a canoer. I don't know if that's the word. She wanted to be in the Olympics as a track athlete. That's where she wanted to get there. And so she was running track. And at the age of 14, she was diagnosed with, I don't know if this is the way you say it, but a hip dysplasia. And which caused some major pain between the sockets of her hip and the bones. And to the point where she just couldn't run anymore. And the doctor basically said, you got to stop. And so her dreams of becoming a track Olympian was crushed, was dashed. But at the age of 12, just 2 years before that, she started to canoe. And so she changed her dream and actually made it to the Olympics. And at the age of 19, won a gold medalist. That's just, to me, a good story. Or maybe you followed Allison Felix. She was well known before the events, but she's leaving Tokyo with the most medals as an Olympian in track, and she won bronze in the 400. And did y'all see the 4x4 women's relay? They killed it and got a gold medal there. But I don't know about you. I'm going to miss it, but I'm going to get some sleep. So it's kind of pro and con there. Here's what I know, though, is when you go to the Olympics, you can bet that every event's going to have a winner. I mean, there's going to have a winner. Well, not really. Did you hear about the men's high jump? The men's high jump. The finalist was an athlete from Qatar and then an athlete from Italy. And I'm not going to pronounce their names because I will butcher it. But they both jumped 7 foot 8 inches. And they were trying for 7'10". Both of them missed 7'10". And so they were going. And the Qatar athlete went and asked one of the officials, said, is it possible for us both to get the gold medal? And the official kind of looked and maybe had to ask someone, but came back and said, yeah, if you want to. And so they both said, we both want gold. I love that story, by the way, as well. So maybe there's not one winner in every event, but there's a winner, and it doesn't go undecided. I mean, when the Olympics are over, you don't have to wonder in any event whether there was a winner or not. They don't just give out participation trophies in the Olympics. Now, we're so glad you made it. Here's your trophy. You can go home. No. You got to compete. You got to go after it. You've got to enter it, and you got to compete to win it if you want to win. They hand out trophies. They hand out medals. You know where you rank at the end of the event. So we've been looking at this Olympic theme for the last 3 weeks. And what in it can we learn from it, to be challenged from it, and from what Paul said. And so we talked about the dream. That there's a dream that we are to have, a goal to have, that we are to pursue. Paul said it this way: I'm going to forget what is behind. I'm going to stretch toward what is ahead, that goal that is in front of me. And then he says, we looked last week in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, you got to compete. You got to go into strict training. They're not going to give it to you. I guarantee you, everyone who won the gold medal didn't win the gold medal just because they showed up and didn't put the work in. I bet if we followed them, we would see the work and the effort and the training and the tears and the sweat and probably some injuries along the way. You got to go into training. You got to go into strict training. But then this morning I want to end this by talking about the win. The win. In fact, we see it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Run in such a way, that's the phrase I want to look at this morning. Run in such a way as to get the prize. It might seem a little bit awkward to talk about winning in this race as a Christian. Really? Well, what's that look like? If we're winning, then there has to be competitors. Because if there's winners, there's also losers. Now, how's that fit into the Christian life where one's winning and one's losing? I don't know if that's exactly what Paul's going for right there. But he does say run in such a way as to win. He is insinuating and teaching us that there's a way to run this race, and that at the end of the day you can look at it and say, he ran to win. What's he talking about? I think we do have to look at this because I think it can get confusing if we don't know what a win looks like. I think we have to understand what Paul's not talking about. And to begin with, I think we have to understand that in this win, this race, we're not the competitors. You're not the competitor, and I'm competing against you. Now, that's a little bit different than what we think about when we think about an event at the Olympics, because you have competitors and they're competing against each other. I don't think Paul's telling us that we need to be competing against each other, and by golly, I'm going to win, which means you're going to lose. That's not what Paul's getting at. In fact, I believe you read through the New Testament, you read through the works and the writings of Paul, he's really all about team. And so we're going to look at this probably more in a minute. But this win, I think there's an individual, aspect. We'll get to that. But I think that the team win is more important to Paul than the individual win. I also want to kind of encourage you to not think as the church as the winner, which means the world is the loser. That's not what Paul's after either. In fact, I think Paul makes a case in Corinthians say, I'm going to be all things to all people. We need to run this race in a winsome way so that the world doesn't look at the church and get a bad taste in their mouth by the way the church is running the race. So that's not what Paul is talking about when he says, hey, run to win. I also don't think that Paul is talking about winning as in there's no problems. And we know that's true. I mean, anybody here is going to stand up and give a testimony on that you have ever experienced a significant portion of life with no problems, no struggles, no heartache, no pain, no wounds. We could stand up and give testimonies and share about, let me tell you about the crisis I'm fighting now. Let me tell you about the heartache I'm in now. Let me tell you about the struggles I'm facing. Let me tell you about the struggle I faced back when. We can't tell a time where we had no problems and no issues, no struggles, no hurt, no pain, no brokenness, because it's not there. I mean, when we live in a fallen world, that's part of the race. So winning is not the absence of that. See, and I think we know that, but I think what we do sometimes is we anticipate, man, if I just can get there, if I just can get out of this battle, if I can just get on the other side of this struggle, if I can just get to this, and we have a destination in mind that we say is kind of problem-free. It's not there. Paul's not talking about winning as being in a place where there's no problems. He's also not talking about, and I'm going to use this word success. Success. For Paul, that's not his definition of winning either. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I think this is seeped into the church, really. That there's this idea, there's a teaching out there that success in this race, this Christian race, is when you've made it, and then they define what that is. I mean, if you got money, if you got health, if you got fame, and then they say, you know what, you just have to have a positive attitude. Your best days are ahead of you, and I think that's, first of all, I don't think that's biblical at all. But I think it sets up this picture, which is not a healthy one, that what if you are struggling and don't have money? Does that mean you're now losing? Well, you just don't have enough faith, is what they say. Bad picture, bad scenario, bad situation. Paul says, no. I'm going to want to talk to you about running this race to win, but we got to talk about what the win is. And to get to that, we need to go back to the goal. Remember the goal, the dream? In Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, he says, I want to know Christ. I want to know Christ. That's my goal. I'm going to forget what is behind. I'm going to stretch towards what is ahead, and I'm going to pursue this goal. What's the goal? To know Christ, the power of His resurrection, the fellowship of His sufferings. I just want to know Him. Not to know about Him, we talked about that. Not just to know information, because information can be misleading. No, I want to know Christ. And so the win is connected to knowing Christ. And what happens, I believe, is when we begin to know Christ more, we begin to take on His character in our living. We begin to emulate Him. We begin to follow Him in His teachings and take on His character and His nature. To me, that's a win. And I think the order is important. I think knowing Christ is important. The more we get to know Christ, the more we behave like Christ, the more we begin to emulate Christ. We can't flip it. We can't say, well, if I just begin to imitate Christ, if I just begin to behave like Christ, then that means I'm going to become more like Him and know Him. There's a difference in those two pictures. The first one, if you say, well, I'm going to behave like Christ, I'm going to do things. And what happens, this is the picture of Christianity, which is just a bunch of do's and don'ts. It becomes very legalistic real quick. This is the way you're to behave. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. And it's just about behavior modification, and we just start doing those things because that's what's expected of us. And here's the word for that. The word for that is religion. The picture for that is the Pharisee. And that's the way the Pharisees lived their life. Here's a list. We got to do these things. If we do these things, we'll please God, and we'll become more like God, and He'll want to know us more if we just behave. And it's a horrible cycle to get in, to live life with a list of rules to say, here's what I've got to do, here's how I have to behave. But if you flip it, and your desire is to know Christ, that's all I really want. I just want to know Christ. And what you find out is when you begin to know Christ, and the more you know Christ, the more you start looking like Christ. The word for that is relationship, not religion. The picture for that is a picture we have in the book of Acts. And the church at Antioch. It says that these followers of Jesus, they were first called Christian in Antioch. They didn't call themselves that, by the way. That would be way too arrogant. And the word Christian in our day has become watered down to mean nothing. But back in the book of Acts, it took on a whole other meaning, because the word itself is like a little Christ, a reflection of Christ. And they got to that point not because they had a list of rules of do's and don'ts, and we've got to do this and don't do that, and I'll get to this little Christ picture. No. They just wanted to know Christ and spend time with Christ and learn about Christ and to walk with Christ. And as they did that, they began to take on the nature of Christ, the character of Christ, the behavior of Christ, so that when the watching world looked at these Christians in Antioch, they were like, man, you sure look a whole lot like Christ. I think a good name for you is Christian. By the way, let me tell you my favorite Olympic story. The athlete is Sydney McLaughlin. And maybe you've heard of her, maybe you've seen her. This is when she just won the 400-meter hurdles in Oregon for the trials. She made it to the Olympic team. This picture was taken right after she broke the world's record. And she put this on Instagram, and right below it, here's the phrase that she put. Here's what she put. She said, "This is the face of a woman who is in awe of God." Now, I kind of was taken aback by that, because you don't hear that from athletes all the time. And I'm also cautious about putting celebrities and athletes as illustrations, because sometimes when their mic is in front of them, they can say, well, I just want to thank God. But then when you look at their life, they're not living for God. And so I'm always hesitant about that. But I began to watch Sydney a little bit closer. You go to her Twitter account, and here's how she describes herself on her Twitter account. I'm a child of God. Not a track athlete, not an Olympian. I'm a child of God. You go over to her Instagram account, and here's what is under her, describes her in her Instagram account. Jesus saved me. No other words are needed. No other descriptions are needed. So I just began to watch her. She won, by the way, the gold medal for the 400-meter hurdles, and then she was on the 4x4 relay team. They crushed it. But every time she talked, she would always speak well of her teammates and even competitors, but she would always talk about God. That God gifted her. That God lifted the weight off of her shoulders, and she was able to run freely. And just everything she did, she just pointed people back to God. And so that she's using this platform, and she runs well. But she's like, I just want you to see God in my life. You know, you think about that. You see Jesus doing that, don't you? You just read the Gospels, and here's what you find about Jesus real quick, is he just is pointing people to his Father. He's just pointing people to his Father. You find out Jesus is not here to point people to himself. And he was God incarnate, remember, but he was like, no. Let's just keep your eyes on the Father. Keep your eyes on the Father. Sydney, as I'm watching her run the race, I see her just saying, no, let's just keep our eyes on God. Just keep your eyes on God. The more you get to know Christ, the more your life begins to take the shape of Christ. The more others will see Christ in you. Paul said in Philippians 1:21, he says, to live is Christ. To live is Christ. It's my life. My life is Christ, so that Christ is in me. Christ is through me. Christ is seen in all that I do, all that I say. So that as I live my life and the thoughts that I have become more like the thoughts Christ would have, or the love that I give would just look a lot more like the love Christ would love with. Or as I serve, I'm just looking more like Christ as He served. Christ is on display. The more you get to know Christ, the more you fall in love with Christ, the more you pursue that goal, the more you begin to emulate Him. It's something interesting about married couples that have been married for a long time. Long time. They just have a way about them, don't they? So that when the wife starts a sentence, the husband can finish it. Or is it the other way around? Okay, it's the other way around. Jim, when the husband starts a sentence, evidently I haven't been married long enough, okay? Still on the journey. And sometimes they can just they know what each other are thinking. Is that not true? Sometimes that's not good either, but they just know what each other's thinking. They've been together so long. They've been in this relationship for so long. They can finish each other's sentences. They know what each other's thinking before the other one even says anything. And sometimes, it's just crazy how this happens. Sometimes they've been married so long, they just kind of start looking like each other. I don't know if that's good or bad either, but it's just part of this relationship. Man, what if it could be said of you that you've just been with Jesus so much that you're just starting to think like Him? And you could know what He's thinking in a situation before you even have to ask Him, God, what are you thinking about this? And you start responding, and you start showing love and grace and kindness and compassion, and it's to a point you don't even really have to think about it anymore, because it's just now who you are, because it's who God is. I love the song that was sung by the Sunshiner Choir earlier of God knows your name. He knows you. The question is, do you know Him? And this goal of knowing Christ is getting to know Him to a point where now you just start living like Christ. He's on display. I think Paul would say when that's happening, oh, that's a win. And I believe Paul, and you read through his letters, you know that he's not about the individual, he's about the team, the church. So I believe Paul would also say, guys, it's not just about you. Because what if you are in a relationship with Christ to a point, and you know Christ, that you just begin to think and you begin to live like that, and He's on display, but then what if your spouse is the same way? And then what if your neighbor is the same way? What if your Sunday school member is the same way? And then we all start responding and living like Christ, and the win is happening not just for the individual, but for the class, for the group, for the church. Oh, how the community wins. I was in leadership conference Thursday and Friday this past week, and this phrase was said, and I've heard this phrase before, but the phrase was said, when the leader wins, everybody wins. When the leader gets better, everybody gets better. When the leader wins, everybody wins. And I'm thinking about this message today, and I was like, you know what? When the church wins, everybody wins. When you win, your marriage wins. When the church wins, your neighborhood wins. When the church wins, your society wins, the community wins. And when the church wins, the world wins. Why? Because they get a good picture of who Jesus is. So I guess the question could be asked is, okay, so what's the world saying about the church today? Is the church getting a good picture of who Jesus is by the way the church is living life and doing life? Or would the world look and say, if that's the picture of the God you're serving, I don't know if I want to. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 25, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. We do it to get a crown that will last forever. Now, remember the Isthmian Games are in Corinth, and Paul's writing this letter to the church at Corinth, and when he talks about going into the games, competing in the games, this is what he's talking about. Everyone in Corinth would understand exactly what Paul is going for, like the Olympics, except it's not yet. It's the Isthmian Games. And he says, man, those who win these games, those who have the gold medals, they don't get gold medals. They get a crown. It's made out of laurel leaves. They put it on there, and he's like, well, by the way, that is going to fade. That's going to dry up. That's going to crumble. It's not going to be forever. But he says, man, we do it to get a crown that lasts forever. I've asked myself, and I've been in several conversations, but okay, so what's this crown? And what's this crown look like? What is this crown that Paul talks about in Timothy and in Corinthians? We get to do it to get a crown that lasts forever. I'm not so sure it's a physical crown. We talk about that, don't we? We say, man, John's going to have a few more crowns and jewels in his crown because he had to put up with... we say that, don't we? No one's ever said that about you, but we say that. Jewels in our crowns, right? Like it's physical. I don't know if it's physical. My take is that it's not. I think the crown is going to be connected to the race, which is to know Christ. See, I think when we get to a place in heaven, we're going to know Christ perfectly, and we're like, oh, this is the crown that's going to last forever. Or maybe the crown is when we enter, we hear from our Father, well done, good and faithful servant. The crown. One Sunday morning, a family, a mom and dad and a small kid, 5-year-old kid, they got ready for church, except it just wasn't your typical Sunday morning. Nothing went right. I know you've never experienced that on a Sunday morning, but they woke up late and they had to rush and they had to hurry, and Johnny probably wasn't like working with them and was being maybe resistant to getting up and getting ready, and mom was determined, we're going to make it to church. We might not have an attitude to go to church, but we're going there, and like it or not, we're getting there. And so they got Johnny dressed, and they shoved breakfast down his face, and they got to church. And you know these moments you're in the car, and you're even fighting in the car, and you pull in the parking lot, and you open the door, and you put this fake smile on, and you go in. How's it going? Well, everything's going well. You've been there? So they went to Sunday school, and they went to church, and they got back home, and they're eating lunch around the dinner table. That's when you still ate lunch around the dinner table on Sundays. And so Johnny's mother asked Johnny, what'd you learn in Sunday school today? What'd you do in Sunday school? Johnny said, well, I played a game, with some toys, and Johnny said, but I learned a new song. So Mom said, well, what song did you learn? And so Johnny, to the best of his ability, began to sing, to be like Jesus. To be like Jesus. All I ask is to be like Him. And through all of life's journey, all I ask is to be like Him. And all of a sudden, it hit Mom like a ton of bricks. She got caught up in doing the right things. We got to get up. We got to get dressed. We're late. And she went to church, and she went to Sunday school, and she sat through the sermon, and she sang through the songs, and she missed Jesus. Until she was around the dinner table that afternoon, and Johnny sang the song to her. And oh, the message of that song. To be like Jesus. To be like Jesus. That's all I ask. Is to be like Him. So just let me ask before I close. How are you doing? How's your living? How's your race that you're running? It's hard. We got that. We know that. It's hard. But are you running it in a way that when those who are watching watch, they see Jesus? Because if that is true, that's a win. Father, we thank you. We thank you for the author, being the author of this life, inviting us to run this race. It's hard. We get beat down. There's struggles. There's pain. But may we run it in a way to win. Understanding that the win is really not about us at all. In fact, we don't need to be in the limelight. May we learn a lesson from Sydney by saying, no, don't look at me. It's all about my Father, God. Oh God, help us to love more like you than we typically do. Help us to serve others like you. Help us to show grace and compassion. Help us to be winsome. May the heart cry of our song be, oh, to be like Jesus, you. To be like Jesus. It's what I want. May that be our prayer today as we run the race. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. So we have this time. Maybe God is just encouraging you. Maybe challenging you. You got to run to win. Don't just go through the motions. Don't just have a checklist you just check off. No. You just get to know Christ. You get to know Christ, and what's going to happen is you're going to start looking like Him, behaving like Him. You're going to be like Him. If you need to make a decision, man, we'd love to talk with you. If you need to say yes to Jesus, we'd love to have that conversation with you. Or maybe to plug into this church and say, I need to be a part of Bacon Heights Baptist Church. Or maybe right where you are, you just say, it's time. As I leave this place, I leave to win. Let's stand. Let's sing.